This is our first event live at the Rust Off over the winter. My name is Patrick Theriault, and I'm here by my fellow co-hosts, Jonathan, Agata, and Elena. We're happy to have you here this morning and online. If you could, at some point, someone could just comment in the chat that you actually hear us through the Teams meeting, that would be very helpful. We have two speakers, so I'm going to hand it over right away to David. But before I do that, I wanted to just introduce the RU in case it's new to anyone in the room. The RU Institute is an extension of Northeastern out of for about 5 years since it started in 2020, I guess, at this point. So they have lots through like analytics, communications, project management, and they say that they like to stuff that every other college in Maine hadn't already been teaching by the time they got up here. So they're looking to teach advanced tech stuff. So I actually teach here. I was here last night, so I probably should have just slept here, if I'm being honest. For communication, for data visualization. So this is like right in my wheelhouse. I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. David's speaking first. We'll have a quick break, and then Pregler will talk second half.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Dave. Thank you again for having me, and especially to the organizers for putting this together. I'm excited to connect with the data community, specifically the Tableau community here in New England. And I say that because last year I moved from Old England over to New England, and I'm really just basically trying to meet other people who really like data. I'm looking forward to talking about R at a Tableau group, so thank you very much for that. I'll try to keep the R evangelizing to a minimum, because really the high level point that I want to make in this talk is that I think solving real world problems, not finishing assigned projects, is something that will make you a better data scientist. And I think R and a lot of the tools that come with the R ecosystem that I'll show you over the next 30 minutes are a great way to help you solve real world problems. I know saying this out loud probably sounds like a bit of a platitude, like, of course, you want to solve problems, not just do specific things. But as I get through the talk, hopefully you'll kind of know what I mean when I say that. Why is this on my mind? Well, the last basically client that I had doing some freelance work the last year was assessing level 7 or master's level data science projects in the UK for basically as an independent assessor for this government program. So I saw a lot of different projects that people were presenting that they were doing as a part of their job. And I was wondering, what are the things that you can do as you're a data scientist, as you're working on different projects that will allow you to essentially upskill and increase your skill set. So it feels a bit like preaching to the choir to talk about why you might want to upskill to people who are literally at a professional development event looking at basically improving themselves. But if you need convincing, technology is, of course, always an ever-changing landscape. And this is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? So it can be quite intellectually stimulating and fun and nice if you're in a secure position and you have someone to kind of guide you through this process. I think this is one of the reasons that people get into data in the first place. But simultaneously, it can be quite anxiety-inducing, especially if you're more junior. Basically, you look at LinkedIn and you're always inundated with tons of different technologies that you could possibly be learning, new things that you think you should check out, especially if you're trying to apply for jobs. And you really want to be able to essentially differentiate yourself and talk about this and not just like learn things for the sake of learning them, but really tether yourself to reality while you're doing this. And this is particularly important in the age of large language models, where you have this sort of very powerful tool to be used for better or for worse on work. Also in a time of mass layoffs, where if you're applying for jobs, of course, there are a lot of people who are doing this. This is just all to say, of course, that if you do, of course, upskill, you'll make your own life easier. You'll become more hireable and more valuable to your colleagues in your organization. Is there a way I can change this so that little thing isn't showing? That, huh? Yeah, I don't know why that's. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so if you are, of course, going to upskill, it's not enough just to tell. In my ideal world, you would just be able to go read a textbook and then tell your colleagues at your boss that you read something, but that's never, of course, enough. You often need to show evidence of your skills, which is something that was coming up in this last project that I was working on. It's important to do this by showing proof, and one way of doing this is, of course, the project or the quintessential data science portfolio or something master's capstone project. When I think of projects, I think of things that are externally motivated, aka your boss or a professor tells you what you need to do. The data presumably already exists in sort of prepackaged format. It's sitting on some sort of database that you would just need to basically write some queries to get, or it's been sitting on someone's computer and they say, oh, we'd really like this analyzed. This would make a great project for you. It really prioritizes tools over everything else. So you say, oh, I want to learn about, random forest models or ChatGPT or some other large language model. And then you kind of basically try to look for things to do this. So this is the classic solution in search of a problem. So you're saying, I really want to learn this technology. I want to find places where I can apply this technology. Of course, there's nothing wrong with this. I think it's siloed for a reason, especially with more in education type settings. You really want to have the bounds of your projects well defined, or else you get project creep really quickly. But what I'll be advocating for today here, as my sort of lead into this, is I'm going to be talking about this alternative approach if I think you really want to improve your skill set as a data scientist. So I'm sort of setting up maybe a false dichotomy, but just for narrative. The other side of this is the problems, not projects side. You show proof of your learning by solving problems. These are intrinsically motivated, meaning that it's sort of an unbounded problem space. You need to decide what you're actually going to take on. Data might not already live somewhere, is already collected and just waiting to be analyzed. The problem drives the choice of tech. So a lot of the time you think, oh, should I be learning some more Tableau features, or should I be learning R or Python or Julia or Rust or whatever it is? If you really think about the problem first and basically how that problem actually links up with reality, it's going to be very immediately obvious which tech solutions make more sense than others. And by leading with this, it really cuts through a lot of that BS of thinking like, oh, I should do this or I should do that, or everybody's telling me I need to keep learning Python. But given the state that I'm in at this one moment, does that maybe make sense? This is, of course, the opposite. We have a problem in search of a solution, which is I'm basically kind of just saying, find a real world problem and solve it. Start a business. Of course, that will make you a better data scientist. But I'm not saying to do something that big, bite off something that you can't chew. But rather, I'm really interested in this idea of the MicroSaaS. So in a consultancy project a couple of months ago, I was building some dashboards for a fractional CFO service that they did SaaS. So I was reading a lot about this world at the time, and I came across this term of MicroSaaS, which really intrigued me. So you could probably guess what it refers to, but you don't want to jump too much on it. So we might be familiar with SaaS as software as a service, right? The golden key to unlimited revenue, build something once, scale it infinitely, get tons of product, people buying it, and you don't have to make widgets for a manufacturing company. The thing that's I think that made me quite interested in it is this micro part of it. And the micro actually refers to two things when you read about this stuff. Basically the market that you're trying to serve, which I think links up with this problem idea. You're really trying to serve a niche market. You're not trying to attend to dog walkers, but rather you're really concentrated on some subset of that you think you can solve a real problem for. And it's also the size of the team. So this often refers to a solo developer, possibly small team of developers as it kind of gets going. But really, it's about restricting the space a lot. And typically, these are not like venture funded things. It's something you're hacking out of your basement on the weekends, in the evenings, to kind of push forward and learn and maybe make a little money on the side. There is this article here where I sort of pulled some of these key terms out of. I won't go through and read it, every single one specifically here, but it basically, the main points that it's again drawing on is it's typically bootstrapped. You're not looking for venture capital. You're not trying to start a project. This is something you can do while you have other responsibilities in your life. And the other important thing is you're really trying to serve a specific niche and solve a specific problem. The other things that have really been captivating my attention in this space, if this is something that like really interests you and you want to read more about it, or you work in SaaS and you need to sort of basically, or you want to get into this area, Rob Walling's books are really, really fantastic, super easy to read, and sort of serve as the source of a lot of inspiration for a lot of the ideas I've been having recently. So what is my thesis with this big lead-in? Well, if you try to build a MicroSaaS, what will happen is you will be forced to wear more than just your data scientist or data analyst hat, which will then force you to see all of your work, and it's a big totality through a completely novel lens. And what I'll try to argue a little bit for here is that the R and Posit ecosystem is actually quite good for doing a lot of this. A lot to invest in, of course, if you don't do this already. But I am a bit of an R evangelist, and if people ever want to learn how to do it, people really paid it forward to me when I was learning. So if this interests you, I will talk your ear off about all of these tools. Okay, so imagine you've wanted to basically do this. I'm going to build something. I'm going to solve a real world problem. It's going to be small. What's the next big question that you need to figure out? Well, it's what problem can I solve? And if you look around, we're kind of in this golden age, I think, of like entrepreneurship and startups and whatnot. And you can find a lot of really great stuff, of course, on YouTube, books, the old-fashioned way. And one piece of advice I found quite helpful comes from this Y Combinator YouTube video, where he's saying basically the one most important thing is thinking, do you have founder market fit for whatever your problem is? He's talking about venture capital, but this really does also apply for small problems. You really want to think about specifically, given your experiences that you have in the world, what do you want to try to figure out, given the connections, your skill set, your tech stack, your also basically availability in terms of how much time and energy you can put into this. If you rewind a couple of months, you really have to focus on that keyword of I. So it's like, okay, when I was reading this a few months ago, where was I? I'd recently done some fractional, basically work for this fractional CFO company. So I was thinking a lot about SaaS. I have a knowledge and network in the performing arts from my time in academia. I just randomly recently read this book on how churn affects revenue in the arts. So I started asking around what kinds of problems existed for people in this space. I won't really go into the market research and all that side of it, but essentially I just landed on this as something that I wanted to solve. I wanted to be able to analyze ticketing data so that performing arts organizations can better understand their patrons' financial behavior. That was the goal. If you're interested in how I got there, more than happy to talk about it, but it's not as important for this. So, want to build something? I want to build an MVP, or minimum viable product, to basically put out in front of people and see if it works. In terms of actually being as minimal as possible, I tried to come up with some requirements. This is what I settled on. I'm going to be able to upload historical ticket data because people were telling me you can see recent stuff. You can't really see how this compares with a lot of the CRMs that orchestras or ballets use. It needs to be faster and more streamlined than Excel to basically solve a real world problem. The output needs to be easily understood by non-technical users. So a lot of I don't know how many people here as Tableau pros have considered trying to get a job in the performing arts. Of course, that doesn't really exist because you don't really hire people in that space to do this specifically. Someone else is doing it. And then I gave myself a maximum of 2 months to work on this basically part-time because you really want to have a deadline or else it starts spinning out into this project thing where you're like hacking on it a bit. Oh, I could do this. Maybe I could learn this technology or whatever. You really want to tether yourself to reality for this. Okay, then knowing if you're a sane person that most businesses fail, most startups fail, most things don't work out, if you're going to be doing this with your precious free time, you really need to think, how can you set this up in a way that you're going to get something out of it? And it's not going to just be you writing a bunch of code or doing a bunch of work that flops and then 2 months go away. So had no idea if this would work or not. And that's, I think, it's a sensible starting place. So you want to establish principles. So however it goes, it ends up being an investment in yourself. Maybe it turns into a portfolio project you could talk about when you're getting new clients or interviewing or something. Again, so you really want to get an overlap in circles there. Remember, the goal was to become a better data scientist. In the sort of lull that I'm having between work at the moment, at a couple of months basically that I could focus on this and this is what I wanted to work on. All right, so my wish list was that I would be able to improve my ability to make interactive dashboards, something that I had not done in a long time. I'd mostly done this Quarto thing before, so it's more static ways to visualize data, never something serious like Shiny, which I'll show you in a second. I wanted to see what all the AI LLM hype is about. I had friends that were basically telling me that I was a bit of a Luddite and resistant to all of these large language models in the way that they could help me with work, which is kind of interesting because I thought I was taking it seriously, but I guess I wasn't. I wanted to be able to productionize what I built and write code in a way that future me, maybe future employers, employees would approve of, as opposed to just sort of writing one-off stuff for analyses. Okay, so we can now jump into developing the MVP. I wanted to develop it in R. It's, if you're not familiar with it, it's an open source programming language. And the reason I really like it is because it has a suite of tools that centralize data-centric development. Specifically, I'll be talking about the tidyverse and the tools provided by Posit. But most importantly, when coming up with an MVP, you really just want to pick the tool that you can work the most quickly in, right? So I can work very quickly in R. I think there's a lot of things about the syntax of R that do make it easy to, once you have a table that you know the data's in, that you can work with this. And I'll, of course, do a little bit of a infomercial for R in a moment here for R syntax. But this is why I wanted to go with this. So bit of a tidyverse crash course. Has anyone, a lot of people here programmed in R before, seen R code? Okay, great. So maybe this is, I can whiz through this then. So just like writing syntax or writing code for any other programming language, of course, you're depending on libraries from other people. I'm importing a couple of different libraries here that make my life a lot easier. And the thing to, of course, know to think about this is that you have a function, in our case here, reads CSV. It's doing something to an argument you pass it. What CSV is it reading? It's reading Superstore orders. And thank you for Patrick for letting me know that the Tableau world has its own data sets that people tend to use. I'm not really a big Tableau user, so that was helpful. So that function basically evaluates and then assigns itself to the table Superstore orders. You just read it a bit from left to right. Not familiar with that. Okay, and then once you do that, you get some output. So it makes a table that maybe you're familiar with. Take note of the ways that the column names are labeled here, because that's the next thing that we're going to focus on. And the other thing that I think makes R quite nice is this thing called the pipe operator. So if you started coding in R like 10 years ago, this thing didn't really exist. Basically, it's this tool that allows you to sort of link up different operations that you're doing in a more sort of natural language way. You read it as and then within a sort of coding pipe. So basically, if you're looking at the code on the bottom here, you're starting with this table called Superstore orders, and then you are performing the function, using the function clean names on it. So if you're into math and thinking about how things reconfigured, you're basically saying, f of x becomes x and then function. So these are functionally equivalent to say clean names of Superstore orders. You're just using the pipe to flip things around and say, take the table's Superstore orders and then clean names. All right, you run that, you get some cleaner names on it. It goes into snake case, which is a little easier to deal with. Then there's all these different verbs that you can use for it. Select and filter. Select is the verb that you use to select columns or to pick columns. Filter is the verb that you use to condition on rows. Yeah.
Are those operations on different lines for a reason, or is that just for readability?
You mean like, could you flip them?
Like, could you have that all as one line, those last?
Yeah. If you want to have it, yeah. R isn't like Python in the sense that like you could add spaces in the middle of stuff. You can do other things. You can do really heinous crimes to humanity with your code, but you can't do that. Yeah, no problem. All right, you do that. Of course, you just chop it down. And of course, there's other things like group by and summarize. So similar, I'm sure everybody's familiar. If you want to do some sort of operation on a small group, you could pick what groups those are, make some sort of summary operation with group by, and then basically take the sum of all the quantity, and you get a summary table. You then take that data here. I'm saving into this object named clean data. And then you could just continue the pipe, right? You can say, okay, take that one data set here, table, pass it to a plotting function, make that plot be a histogram, flip it on its side, give it a couple labels, put on a default theme so it looks nice, and then save it to my plot, and then you get a plot. So the thing I really like about this, and the reason I took a moment to show it to you, is that as you're developing things and as people are telling you things, I think it's quite, I find it a lot easier than other tools that I use to essentially think through this. It might just be a fluidity thing because it's something that I like doing a lot. But then if you're iterating and someone tells you, oh, I have this one graph that I'd like to be able to visualize with my ticketing data, it's a very quick way to make it statically and then throw it into a Shiny app. Okay, so with that, that's the way tidyverse basically, or the pipe operator and some verbs in the tidyverse work, dplyr specifically. There are other tools like Quarto, Shiny, and Shiny Assistant. Quarto lets you make documents. Shiny allows you to make interactive dashboards. And Shiny Assistant is this new large language model specifically for Shiny apps. Then the other thing you want to keep in mind that I think is really great about the R ecosystem for this is that it allows you to essentially develop with production in mind during the process. So you can get something into people's hands very quickly. You want to spend the minimal time on MVP. The faster in someone's hands, the better. Right in an environment where it's easy to deploy, keeping production in mind. And when I say production, I don't mean like put it on some Amazon cloud thing or whatever, but rather I like the definition from this book here by Colin Fay and colleagues, where production just qualifies as software that's used, even if only by one person. It's relied upon by its users, and it has real life impact if something goes wrong. So if you can keep all these things in mind as you're going, you're going to be able to iterate a lot quicker. And again, show people what you're making fast and then find out if it's not good. And the other important point, if you're going now jumping back to this sort of higher level world of building the SaaS, MicroSaaS, and trying to figure out if you have a good idea or not, you really want to get buy-in, right? So I had this idea, oh, I'm going to analyze ticket data. There's not a lot out there. This could be a fun thing to do, but it could also be an awful idea, right? Because I haven't actually put it in front of people to figure out what's going on. This book here, very good at sort of helping you figure out how to navigate that space. But the one sort of take home that I took from it was that you really want to get buy-in as you're working on it. You want to do this fast. And in the age of large language models, you can really use this to your advantage. So an example of it. So this here is a GIF that I took of myself using this Shiny LLM. This is me typing in real time because I wasn't about to try to do it in a live talk. I'm saying create a basic app with the BSlib library that makes 3 tabs here. So this is the thing that kind of hooked me into this. You type it into that. It's some large language model type engine that generates a bunch of code that's happening here on the left. It tells you what's going on, but then it also then dynamically renders in essentially an environment that's being created like literally on the internet where you can see the code and interact with the application in real time. You can then, of course, do a bit of prompt engineering here and say, okay, you've got the UI. Now add in a little bit of data. I'm saying add the plot here with the penguins data. This penguins data set that people are using. Needs a P guard. And of course, it updates the code here and then translates to the UI. The real advantage of this, I think, is that you can save, of course, tons of time. If like if I just had to type that out and I knew exactly what I wanted my UI to look like, that would take me like at least an entire day. I'm not a fast typer, even though I'm not that bad. But like this is the stuff that you don't want to be wasting your time on, and you want to basically get in front of someone as quickly as possible, which is what I did. So I tried to get some buy-in from a small organization. I basically posted a video of me tinkering around with this for about 45 minutes to make it look nice. I posted on this group of arts administrators, essentially looking for a data trade and saying like, okay, I'll do this for your organization if you give me data, and I'll give you whatever insights, and you can use the tool maybe if I launch it at some point at a lower cost. So Orlando Family Stage, a children's theater in Florida, sent me about 10 years worth of ticketing data, which was quite nice of them. Based on this little GIF here that I just posted on this group. This is maybe 30, 45 minutes of me tinkering around with it, trying to make it look like it's something that's real. And then again, once I had someone to say, okay, I'm on board with you, as opposed to me going away and working on something for 2 months without any, tethering to myself to reality, I had confirmation that there might be something here, right? So you don't want to move forward and just start working unless you have some buy-in from someone. Okay, so I went ahead and I did that with this sort of iteration alpha. It took about 2 weeks to kind of like work on this on and off. A lot of it was just refreshing my knowledge of Shiny and how that works. And of course, then I took the advice and showed it to someone before it was ready, what I thought it was ready, in order to get feedback. And what they told me is I made a worse version of their CRM, which was a little painful to hear after working on this. But it was very helpful, right? Because if I would have spent the next 2 or 3 weeks working on this, it would have been a waste of a lot of people's time. I would have learned a bit of Shiny. I would have gotten better at this, but that's not what I set out to do, right? I wanted to try to solve a real problem and think about how this iterates in a larger space as I'm going. So the guy said, okay, we like this. I see the potential, but really what I want is analysis. You know stuff about data science and stats and whatever, and we want access to that without having to do a lot. And I was like, okay, fair enough. That's what I should try to do. They wanted things that they couldn't do with the basic tooling available, but I think by only showing them this, without him showing me all of his CRM and what it does, which would be a waste of time, then I was able to figure out what could essentially be the things that don't already exist in there. Because he's like, oh, okay, you showed me this. It's not that great. I can basically do this. Let me just show you what I work with here or there. This is what I have. This is what I wish was there or what I couldn't be there. And of course, I could imagine some things that weren't there. All right, so won't go through every single iteration and every funny thing that people told me as I was doing this. I ended up on this here. So this is the current working version of this dashboard. You upload data, so it crunches through all this data. And what it does is it uses historical data. So it says, okay, take the last year, 2 years since the start of the season, do different revenue projections based on the whole, new versus returning customers. So it links back to that thing about revenue in the arts. People really want to know what types of events bring in different types of customers based on their ticketing behavior, which is quite popular at the moment. And you can, of course, do that quite straightforwardly with this. And also this, the thing that I ended up landing on is not making a bunch of charts, but really trying to think about the guy that I was talking to. And he wanted it to be not technical, right? So I set it up in a way that you literally have a question that you want to answer. And by clicking on that question, it directly shows you the chart that you then, basically that answers whatever that question is. So you're really taking a lot of the mental offloading from the person using it to what those insights are. There's some other stuff that uses historical data. I'm happy to also just boot up the app. But again, I wasn't about to do this and click at the same time. And then lastly, it does this big table configuration where it says, okay, if you select on a specific event that you want to run or target, you can return everybody in your database that hasn't already bought a ticket to that event with all of their different purchasing behavior updated for the most updated reload of it. So kind of fun, and hopefully will turn into something. So the big takeaways from everything, I think by trying to make this MicroSaaS, it allows you to own the entire process, which is both good and bad. Pro, it forces you to consider everything and the so what from day one in a way that I haven't felt on different consultancy projects or other things that I've done before. So I really like that about it. Con, the context switching, I think is quite difficult. Developing all day, and you have a meeting in the afternoon with someone that might use your app. And I think that's can be a bit rough, I guess, at moments. Maybe that's just me. Wearing your product hat really changes how you see your development, especially how you are leaving your technical debt behind as you're essentially coding along. The cons, yeah, you generate this technical debt if you really do truly commit to moving fast. But of course, I think a pro, as we live in this time with this freak level tooling, these large language models, and really trying to think about ways that they can improve your workflow, will really open up possibilities that I don't think could have existed like 5 years ago. So 5 years ago, I could still code R, right? But this would have been of serious financial, whatever, risk commitment to do something like this, as opposed to hack away in a way that it's not possible, that it is possible now. Okay, if you want to do this, I will say this is my advice for people. Tether yourself to reality as much as humanly possible. It's a long road from coming up with a problem to getting someone to pay you. No one's paid for me this yet, even though they say they might. You set yourself up for success. by thinking, how can I work in a way on this project that even if it fails as a project, that I win? Get your ideas in front of people fast. It's painful. You'll feel the need to say, well, I haven't really done this or I haven't done that, but really is truly informative in a way that was helpful to find out. You're trying to really solve real people's real problems. So you don't want to just assume that you kind of figure out what's going on. Really, by tethering yourself to reality regularly and showing people what you're building, it helps a lot with that. And really try to give yourself different skin in the game milestones to clock your success, right? You show it to someone, they tell you about something, they say, oh, I'd love to introduce you to this person who'd be more interested. Or they trade with some services, they give you some data for free, you whip up an NDA on LegalZoom for free, and then you get their data. Or of course, you've developed this MVP and says, oh, you've actually just literally, this would make my life so much easier. Shut up and take my money. That's the dream, but you have to have a lot of mental fortitude that I don't have to just assume that that's going to work. And then the other piece of advice is practice kindness for future you. So you really want to develop with, I think, a what if this does work mindset possible. So being a bit optimistic as you are going along. I think I found that to be quite helpful in navigating move fast versus write good code. You want to find this balance, between moving fast. You want to write code that's meant to be read by people, not just trying to come up with fancy one-liners that'll impress someone. So AKU, future colleagues that you might work on this with, right, if it takes off. So next steps for this project, there's a marketing agency in California that said, oh, we'd like to use this for a couple of clients. That would be kind of fun. So maybe they'll just take it or whatever. And it'll be a small thing on the side for some small potential revenue. But regardless, because I still have ownership of the whole sort of technical stack, it really is this way to, again, become a better data scientist by having something where you're getting direct continued learning outside of your data science silo, forces you into data engineering, at some point could force you into sales, and also the delegating of things that are essentially not critical to what you're necessarily doing. Okay, and then lastly, I am in this lull between contracts at the moment. I'm still doing some work with my fractional CFO gig, but I'm open to work and looking for long-term stuff. So I spent the last year freelancing. If anybody is, of course, hiring and my skill set or myself sounds like something you might want to work with, I'd love to talk with you about that. Ways to get in touch with me. This is my personal email. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I give the specific, you have to put my full name in because I do not have a unique name, which is wonderful for internet anonymity, and I love my name, but it is not good for SEO. And then I'm sometimes on Blue Sky as well. So please feel free to add me on LinkedIn or come talk with me afterwards. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm happy to take any questions.
Data, so you have to trade such insights is such a cool way to know. I have a broader, I like your definition of production of like someone will use this, but where do you think Shiny fits into like corporate production? Like,
I think it's really use case dependent. As I'm finding and considering different ways to host this in terms of what you are doing in your org and who's going to use it for what. That's when things start to become a bit gnarly. So I really liked Shiny for its rapid development of something that could make sense. If this really struck a chord and I'm sitting on the next big money thing, I probably will do something else, right? And call one of my web developer friends and say, this is the functionality that I need. I'm willing to help a little bit on it, write some of the backend in Python or something like that. But yeah, it's like in one of the data engineering books I was reading, it really talks about these like two-way doors, like try to make decisions that like you could walk into something and if it's a bad idea, you don't like it. I've walked into Shiny for this one specific project. And if it doesn't make sense for something, whatever, I'll just walk back out of it and do something else, especially with this large language model stuff where it's like, yeah, it did take me time to write the code, but really what I'm searching for here is like a signal on a real problem in the world that could be fixed with that. So that's a bit of a roundabout answer to should you use Shiny within your specific organization. But yeah, if you want to talk more specifically about how to get things deployed within that, that's what I'm kind of looking into next. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really inspiring. A lot to think about.
So, like every time I've worked on like a real world data science problem from scratch, 90% of the work is data engineering and data punching.
Yes.
And it seems like you sort of just skip to the end for this reason, for the purpose of this presentation.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, can you speak about like when you get a data set from a a small company, they don't know that it's
Yes.
relational database or a CSV format. So
Right.
what do you do with that?
Yeah. So one thing that you learn from the sort of the startup space is that there are bad customers, and of course they're not my customer yet, but there are people who want the idea of what you can do, but they're just not ready for it yet. So I am interested in working with one person that I was introduced to, and she sent me pages and pages of like PDF transactions on something, and I was like, okay, this technically is the data for it, but I'm not about to do this, and it's a very small organization, so it would be a very kind gesture for me to do this analysis, but it's not what I'm looking for, right? So that's one side of it, is like you have to narrow in on people who are, like in my case, using a CRM where they electronically track who buys what ticket when. Like that's the baseline for it. Then the second part of that whole thing, then trying to think, okay, with this sort of larger arc in the whole thing, if you know what your kind of output is, you basically just have to start with the end in mind and work backwards and say what tables would make my life easiest to do with that, and do your best to try to normalize something, So one of the things I'm happy to, I don't know if you want to see the guts of the Shiny app, but like is importing this file and said, okay, as long as you send me this in this format, every single row is a different ticket transaction. There's a grouping variable on transaction ID, blah, blah, blah. I'll take care of the rest, right? And then I say, okay, from there, as long as this is always my starting place, what can I parse out and normalize in order to make my own development process easier, knowing full well that might be a really bad choice. But there definitely are things that you can do. Like the set that they give you at the start is never what you're running all of your Shiny or your tidyverse pipes on. Yeah.
I'll also say, like, as a devil's advocate, like, yes, it might take up the bulk of your time. The hardest part is still making something valuable and delivering that value. Like, that's the impossible to do thing, even though you know what you want to make and you have to do 80% of your time in data engineering and cleaning and prep. Like, that's the easy part, because there's an end goal and you can do that, but actually making something with value and demonstrating that value to somebody else is like impossible. You have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's just also the tethering yourself to the reality of the fact that when you're doing this type of data work, like you're mostly doing data engineering a lot of the time, which is, again, I think a big argument for the tidyverse and all these other things, because I feel like I can work really quickly in making these tables, cleaning up text columns, splitting stuff up, whatever. But yeah, data and that's just the nature of whatever you're doing. That's a good point. Yeah, in the back.
I was just gonna, so this is a Tableau user group, so I just thought I would mention, like, you didn't talk a lot about once you had output of your R and you were using some kind of R libraries for the visualization and all of that stuff. Tableau's really good at that, and like for my data science capstone, instead of using, like, it was a Python based boot camp, but instead of using a lot of Python libraries and stuff like that, I just squinted a little bit, and Tableau kind of looked like an application platform. So that's kind of what I did. So that can also buy you a lot of time, as opposed to thinking about, okay, I'm going to serve up this visualization, I'm going to use Flask or whatever you use to serve that up. You can actually use Tableau for that, and it's really good at it. And I haven't used Tableau in this way, but I think Tableau talks to R pretty well now. So if you've got your data frames in R, you can kind of use Tableau to kind of serve that.
Yeah, that's something I want to definitely explore myself. I think one of the things that the only reason I didn't, not to defend why I didn't use Tableau at a Tableau user group, was just because I wanted to learn. I wanted to get better at Shiny for a couple of prospective clients that I was thinking about working with, and I did it. I was quite rusty at the time, so I said, okay, I want to do it. How am I going to go through that? Sweet. Okay, talking to Tableau user group, I should know it better. I'm like, ooh, I say sometimes. But then there's the question of, word to word. I don't know about the space of like charging people, getting people to do this, having total control over the signal on user feeds to users. I don't. So that's the big.
But also positive spin on some painful feedback.
Yeah.
So I consulted with a friend who built a CRM and it took him like 2 years.
Yeah.
So if you built a bad CRM in like 2 weeks, that's
Why wasn't much better than we'll see there?
really well.
That's it. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions here? Any in the chat?
On the chat, we in Studio used to develop the visualizations in this example.
Yes, James. I have been working in most Studio, which is the IDE, to basically do this. Yes, I flirted momentarily with Cursor because all of my developer heavy friends they were the ones that were saying like, oh, if you're not using Cursor, then you're just wasting your own time. I did not find that for what I wanted to do. But yes, I was using RStudio.
To Tableau, I think every Tableau dashboard, you can kind of think as like an enterprise process. It's a way, it's a lot of interactivity. You really need to know who your users are and what their questions are. So just thank you for bringing this totally different perspective, because honestly, I think it's actually really appropriate.
Oh, I appreciate that. I was very nervous coming here. I'm like, I'm just going to be talking about some weird art stuff that really intrigues me. And people that, yeah, I see this. So I really appreciate you taking the time to say that explicitly.
Yeah, thinking about this talk, I was thinking about how to market it into the Tableau, and this is the first time we ventured away from the Tableau specific talks. Actually, we wanted to do this for a while, and I'm glad to have you here to do that. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just the point, I wrote it down. Let's dig up the quote. The point about kind of developing with the what if this does work mindset. The whole chunk of my work is supporting people taking over dashboards. Built that way.
Yeah.
And Tableau not being a code-based tool, but being a point-and-click-based tool, you can have tons of configuration in it that makes it really hard to piece out what is this supposed to do right now.
Yeah.
And so for me, that just hearing somebody coming from the code space echoing that piece of think about yourself months from now, or the person who's going.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the first places I was, I think when I was doing my master's, I was working with a guy, and he was a huge like Lisp developer, and he was always like, "Oh, if you can't write it in one line, then are you even?" And it was totally, he was joking, but of course I thought like, what if I could? And then that really put me on a bad path for developing for a very long time, and now I commit to collaborating with me in 6 months as my #1 collaborator. And the question there?
Yeah, so the phrase data trade, is that like, is that something that you picked up, or is that just?
I just made that up. Yeah, I'm just trying to, because from that mom test book, that is what it's essentially talking about. Like, you just have to have skin in the game and don't move forward with some idea and basically live in magical thinking that you're so smart that you know what the market wants and you're going to hit product market fit as soon as you launch something. Like,
Yeah, I just think that's an awesome idea. And I hadn't heard that term data trade before, but this idea that like you're developing a way to produce analysis and insights. And hey, if you give me data, I'll give you back insights. Like that's such a cool idea.
It is. It's of course a bit of a privileged position, because in the sense that like if you don't have a job in doing this other kind of stuff, it can just then turn into free labor, or like when people are asking you to do tons of stuff. But if you are in a position to do this and it interests you, then of course, it's a fantastic way to tether yourself to reality.
So for our second talk, we have Anne. She's going to give a presentation on ways that you can be sure to keep your dashboards fresh and low maintenance, which is really appropriate for what we were just ending on the beginning of the end of the last talk. So I'll hand it over to you if you want to share your screen.
Absolutely. Let me do that now. If anybody can't hear me or can't see my screen in just a second here, try that. There we go. All right. If you can't hear me or you can't see my slides, will somebody please yell at me because I can't see the chat. So.
We got you. And if you want to go into presentation mode, it would be good for the size of our screen in the room. Perfect. Oh, yeah, that too.
All right. So hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here to talk about building low maintenance Tableau dashboards. A little bit about me. This is not me, but I figured you probably have a picture of me from the teams anyway. So I figured I'd put a picture of my chicken. My name is Anne Pregler. I'm a Tableau developer and a consultant. I've also been a Tableau ambassador, a couple of Viz of the Day, and placed an Iron Viz this year. I work doing Tableau development for several large companies as a consultant. I would love to be there in Portland with you today, but unfortunately I live near the other Portland in Oregon, where we have more rain, less snow. So in the wrong time zone for that, but always love that Portland connection. I love gardening, knitting, and chickens. You can see here a picture of Alberta Einstein, one of my chickens trying to attack a shovel, which is kind of standard for her. But moving on, let's talk about Tableau. Plan for this speech is we're going to talk about dashboard maintenance and first of all, why it's bad. I think we mostly know why, but I'm going to cover just a couple of the problems that can occur when you have high maintenance dashboards. Then we'll talk about some really specific technical strategies to reduce maintenance. So some things that you can implement in workbooks to help lower the amount of times you have to come in and update them. Then we'll talk about something a little bit fuzzier, where there aren't easy technical fixes to the maintenance problems, and you have to start making tough decisions between lower maintenance versus more customization. And finally, we'll have a little bit of time for some questions and discussion. Patrick told me that this group enjoys a lively debate, so we'll make sure to leave some time for that. All right. First question, what's so bad about maintenance? By maintenance, I'm talking about any time that you or somebody else has to go into your Tableau dashboard and change something in order for it to keep working and keep functioning. In a perfect world with a zero maintenance dashboard, you would be able to just publish it once and be done. Never have to touch it again unless somebody wanted, a new view or something. But in the real world, we often end up with dashboards where something has to be changed and updated every so often in order to keep up with changes from the data source. This causes problems. It takes time. It's an opportunity for error. Anytime you have to go in and change something, there's always the chance you could change it wrong. And it adds more failure points. If your entire system relies on, Barb from accounting every so often updating the date in the dashboard to be 2024 instead of 2023, if she's ever not there, the dashboard stops working. Obviously, maintenance isn't always avoidable, and it's not always even something that we want to avoid. Sometimes it's worth it because you get a good trade-off or a good result. But in general, having to go in and maintain a dashboard is a net negative. If you have to update it, it's going to cost you in some way. And the question is, can it be avoided? Or if it can't, is it worth it? First of all, let's talk about a couple specific times that maintenance tends to occur and some ways that you can leverage Tableau to help avoid them. First one, avoid hard-coded values. This is where the vast majority of manual maintenance on dashboards comes from. You have some kind of hard-coded value, a number, a string, a date, something that's in one of your calculations or in one of your filters. And if it changes, you have to go in and change it in the calculations. My advice on this is that pretty much any time you type something that isn't a field name into a calc, ask yourself, could it ever possibly change? Is there a conceivable world where this value could ever be different? Sometimes if you're taking the average of two things and you're dividing by 2, that 2 is probably pretty safe. But sometimes, maybe more often, if you're having to enter a value, it's possible it's going to change. If you have a product name that you're entering manually, could that product ever be called something different? If you're using an important date, will that date be a different date in the future? If there's even a possibility that that value that you're hard coding ever could change, it's well worth taking the time to see if you can avoid doing it. If you can avoid putting in a hard-coded value at all, because if you can, that helps you never have to come back and change it. If possible, push back to the data source. Tableau is really intended as a visualization tool. We often end up doing quite a lot of calculation and data modeling in Tableau itself, and luckily it's powerful enough that we can do that. But ideally, any type of complex calculation or logic will be pushed back to the data source. That makes it universal and accessible to multiple dashboards. If you can't do that, leverage Tableau's built-in functions. If you're working with dates, today tends to be very, very valuable, or max to dynamically set the value. Here's an example of this. This is one that I've seen a lot of newer dashboard developers do especially. This is outdated Superstore data, but we'll pretend that the current year is 2017. Sometimes you will see people say, well, we just want to show the current year. Easy, set a filter, click 2017, perfect, life is happy, we're all good. The problem, of course, is that when it becomes 2018, you're going to have to go back in, uncheck 2017, and change it to 2018 instead. This happens in filters, it happens in calculations, but luckily it's pretty easy to avoid. Here's one way you can avoid this, using the today function. Today returns the current date. You can use year of today to get today's year. If it matches the year of order date in this case, great. That means the year must be the current year. You can then use this field as a filter and filter to true to get only the current year. And when today becomes next year, your year filter will update as well. Another alternative that's a little bit more flexible if you don't always want to use the current date is to use the values that are in your data. This is a level of detail calculation that takes the year of the maximum date in your data set. So if you have sales data from several years, it's going to find what the latest year is, checks to see if that's equal to the year of the order date, and then again, you can filter on this by setting your filter to true. This will make sure that whatever is showing on your dashboard is always the year of the latest order date that you have. In this case, typically that would be the current year. So again, this will stay dynamically updated as your data changes. So if you're able to, leveraging these built-in functions or pushing back to your data source, instead of taking the shortcut of actually just typing in 2025, when you're writing a calculation or making a filter, will make sure that you don't have to do yearly updates whenever your data changes. Suggestion 2, use the power of parameters. Technically or calculated fields, I prefer using parameters for this. I'll talk about why in a second. But the general idea here is that if you do have to set a hard-coded value, because sometimes you do, sometimes it's really not avoidable, try to set it in only one place. That means that when you have to do your maintenance, it will be much faster and you're much less likely to miss something. So here's an example of this. This is again with Superstore data. Let's say that we have a launch date for a product, and we want to know a couple things with that launch date. So my launch date here is January 2nd, 2025. So maybe I want a calculated field here that tells how many days an order was after the launch date. And maybe also I want to know how many days after the launch date the order shipped. And maybe I also want to know what the current day from launch is. Oh, and maybe I want a color code on a calendar, and so I want to check to see if that's the launch date. You can see here I've put in this launch date manually 4 times. If I have to go through and update this, if I ever have a new product with a new launch, I'm going to have to go into all of these calculations and update that date. And it's pretty likely that I'm going to miss one, or that I might mistype it in one of these, or that I might just forget and be busy and not update it. To avoid this, we can use a parameter. So here you can see I'm creating a parameter that just has that launch date value of January 2nd, 2025. Then I can replace it in all of my calculations with that launch date. Now, when I'm ready to change this, because I have a new product, new launch date, all I have to do is update the parameter, and all of these calculations will update as well. You also have the option here to do this using just a regular field. You could make a calculated field with the launch date and use that in all of your calculations as well. I typically prefer to use a parameter just for storage size, especially if you have a large data set. That way it only needs to be processed once instead of once on every field. But I suspect in practice that doesn't make a whole lot of difference. And so if you want to make it as a calculated field, put it in a nice folder for organization, that's also a very valid option. The main point is just to make sure that if you're going to have to update something, you only have to do it one time, and it's easy to find what needs to be updated. Tip 3, keep your visuals flexible. This is another trap that is really, really easy to fall into, especially if you're developing in a hurry. A lot of these problems happen when you're developing in a hurry. Try to avoid using fixed values when you're formatting. That includes things like axis limits, histogram bins, aligning charts across a page, reference lines, table formatting. Anytime that you're using either fixed values on those actual numbers, or you're relying on manually stretching or shrinking the size of something, you can run into problems if your data changes and enters a different range than what you expected. So here's an example. We have a very nice bar chart here. The axis is set to auto, but you can see there's not a lot of space at the top. And maybe I want some more space in order to have room like for some labels or some annotations. It's really, really tempting here to just go into the axis and just change the endpoint to be a little bit higher than it currently is. This will work. It's very quick. But the problem then is that if your data ever changes, your bars are just going to go straight off the screen, or they're going to be way too low. This chart wouldn't be flexible. A better way to do this is using a reference line. So here I've created a calculation that will find the maximum sum of sales at the level of detail of region. That basically means it's going to look at each region, it's going to look at the sum of sales and find the largest per region. So in this case, it would be the West region, which is a little over 700,000. Then I'm multiplying it by 1.1. I think in the comment I say 1.2, but yeah, you can do either. Basically, the idea is I'm going to multiply it by slightly over 100% to give me a value that's just a little bit higher. It will give me a little bit of buffer. So instead of this calculation returning the actual height of the highest bar, it will return something that's 10% higher than it, just a little bit higher. From there, I can add that as a reference line to my graph. You can see here, you can see the reference line, but it's pushed it up a little bit higher. It's at about 800K now instead of 730 or whatever it was at. Then you can format your reference line. Oh, sorry. First of all, you should make sure your axis is automatic. If you haven't changed it, then it probably still is. But if you did fix it, set it back to automatic. Then you can format your reference line, make that line invisible, hide the label, hide the tooltip. This line won't be visible at all, but you will have that little bit more space on your axis. And importantly, when your data changes, this buffer zone will update with it. You're not going to be stuck with some fixed cap. This also applies pretty commonly when you have two side-by-side charts that you want to bring in sync with each other. Because if you just set the axes manually, you run into the same problem. But you can use this same reference line method, make the reference lines based on the value of the other chart to keep them synchronized. All right. So the strategies we've talked about so far are great if you have those situations. And there's a lot of situations you can extend from there that use the same concepts to try to keep calculations and filters and charts flexible and able to update themselves automatically. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you all know, it's not always that easy. If there's a strategy you can use, great, use it. Right? Those ones we talked about really don't have many downsides, other than they take a few more minutes to set up. But often we have to make a choice. Getting lower maintenance comes with lower flexibility. Next, I'm going to show you a couple examples of some times that you really do have to make a decision. And I'll give some suggestions of ways that you might be able to adapt or accommodate what you're trying to do while still keeping a low maintenance dashboard. But sometimes the question is going to come down to what's more important. So first example here is custom sorting. You can see on my Superstore chart over there, or table, I've decided that accessories, copiers, and binders are high priority products for this company, and so I have manually sorted this list so that they are at the top. This is great because it brings the most important information to the top. It makes it really easy for users to find the stuff that they especially want to see. You see this a lot if people have key customers, key products, or in other industries, some kind of focus area that they want to see first. The problem is that if any of these categories ever change names, the sort will break. If new products get added, they're going to be tossed down to the bottom and won't necessarily be sorted the way that we want them to be. And any kind of change to those products will require somebody to probably go in and fix it, add it to the custom sort in the place that it should be. An alternative here is to see if there is a metric that will approximate your sort order. It may not do this exact custom sort, but it might be close enough to work. Like for example here, I'm showing the total sales for each category. You can see that my categories aren't sorted exactly by total sales, but if I did sort by total sales, accessories, binders, and copiers would still be on the top. Maybe that's close enough. Even if it changes occasionally, the most important products are still at the top. Is that a good enough alternative for your use case? Maybe it is, maybe it's not. That's where that decision comes in. A second time that this shows up is manual grouping. Why we do it? Pretty obvious. It keeps your data structure simpler, and it makes your tables, charts, filter options all a lot cleaner and nicer to look at. The problem, of course, is again, if you ever get a product that's not manually entered in one of these groups and you don't have an other category set up, or if any of these products ever change names, you're going to break your groups. Somebody will have to go back in and put those changed products into the correct groups. Alternatives here. Sometimes there is a condition that you can use to group based on a calculated field. Like for example, maybe the product IDs for these products have some kind of 2 or 3 letter code in them that indicates their category. If there is, great. If there's not, then there's not a lot you can do. Look for it, see if you have it. If not, you're probably out of luck. The other alternative here, and the one that I would always recommend for grouping like this, is to push it back to the data source if possible. Any kind of grouping or categorization is going to be more effective if it's done at the data source level. And then that's also helpful for anybody else using that data source for other dashboards or non-Tableau stuff. Third example, invisible filters. By this, I mean any filters that the user doesn't get to directly interact with. That could just be filters that are applied but aren't user interactable. Or it could be like when you have a pre-filter to limit the number of options that your user is able to select. These are great because they keep irrelevant data hidden and they limit the number of choices users have to make. But again, you can probably see the problem coming here. If anything ever changes, if you have new categories or new products, somebody will have to go back in and change this manually. Some alternatives. Try to use exclude instead of include on your filters. If you check that exclude box and exclude values instead of including them, that means that any new or changed values will be in the filter by default. That might lead to there being too many options in the filter, and you might still need to change it, but it's better than having those new options being completely hidden. Or whenever possible, filter on conditions, not values. Again, this goes back to, if there's a metric that could approximate what you're trying to do, can you filter on that condition instead of on the specific values? The big question here, when you're dealing with any of those issues or any of the other times that manual maintenance creeps into dashboards is it worth it? I've said that manual maintenance is a net negative, which is absolutely true. You always lose something when you have to do manual maintenance. But you may gain something as well, which I guess would actually make it just a straight negative, not a net negative. I take it back. It's a negative, but your net could be positive if you wind up getting more benefits than you lose in the time and potential for error. So what you're weighing here is how much time does it take to do the maintenance? How many fields do you have to edit? How many dashboards do you have to go into? How long will it take? How often do you have to do that maintenance? This is pretty key and is sometimes overlooked, but think about this on a long time frame. over a year, over 5 years? How often do you think you're going to have to do the maintenance? Will you have to do it, monthly? If you have to do it monthly and it takes you 2 hours to do, that's a bigger burden than a 5-minute change that might have to be done every 5 years. How much opportunity for error is there? If maintenance means that you are manually updating a ton of hard-coded values, think about typos, think about the typing an incorrect date, incorrect value. How many chances are there for somebody to make a mistake when they're doing this updating? Because if that error is made, that of course causes problems. And how much of a problem is it if the maintenance isn't done? If something breaks in the dashboard because it needs manual adjustment and you're not there, is that a big problem? Does it mean that the business can't get what they need? Or is it not really that big of a deal and kind of just an inconvenience? That should be a factor as well, because you can't always guarantee that you or somebody else with your skills will be around when maintenance needs to happen. All of these downsides get weighed versus the big question. How significant is the benefit to the users? If your users are gaining increased usability, increased flexibility, and being able to access data that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access, maybe maintenance is worth it. It's worth the hassle of having to update. If it's a minor convenience and it's going to take a lot of time or cause a lot of problems, maybe not. That's a decision that I can't tell you the right answer for, and unfortunately I don't have any tricks or tips to avoid that one. It really comes down to understanding your business, your needs, and making that call between low maintenance and increased flexibility. All right. I'd love to leave some time for questions, comments, thoughts. I know I went through that a little bit quicker than I expected, so I'm sorry if we have extra time to fill here. It's a little bit tricky to hear folks in the room, so I would just love if you have a question that you want me to answer, maybe just pre-phrase that by saying that. If you have more of a comment or thought for general discussion, maybe say that, and maybe one of the folks in the room can help kind of moderate that discussion.
I have a handheld mic so I can walk around if anyone has a question. Has anyone encountered one of these before? Have they made a decision or trade-off in their work with Tableau before? I certainly have. Oh my gosh. Thinking about that parameter option for like when there's a leap year. When you have to put a date in, and then February comes around every time there's an Olympics. Thank you, Anne, for talking. I'll walk over to our first question.
Hi, thanks for that. I'd say in addition to individual dashboards, one of the things I try to think about with scaling this stuff is with data sets. So we use like a lot of like the same base data set over and over and over again. And something you can do with those data sets that are even published in Tableau, we have like a data extract from Snowflake and it drops it down, and then there's like 50 dashboards that are based on it. If we know that a good portion of those dashboards are going to need like a particular calculation and we kind of want control over that, you could do it in the data source. But what's nice about the Tableau is if you publish the calculation in the data set, it'll then get published out to all of the dashboards. So if you want like unique control over like a specific calculation, you can put it there and it'll get published out. And so you only need, now you have reached the scale of not just updating a dashboard, but updating all of your dashboards at once. And the nice thing, especially for like a business user, if you have like power users that are using your data source, is they can see the calculation in Tableau, so they can understand like the business logic potentially that went into it. It's not like hidden deep into the database where it's just a field, but they can't edit it, right? So they can see it but not edit it. They can make a copy and like riff on it, but I found that that is pretty helpful if you have like these standard business logic you need applied to like a data source all over your organization.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a huge way to save time, is to push that back to that data source, whether it's the Tableau data source or the original. And I completely agree. I love that you can actually see those fields and edit them. I also love publishing folders in Tableau data sources for the same reason, to help kind of that organization. And it's a good way to group fields that you might be updating in that source so that your Tableau developers know what could be coming.
By the way, did you bring that dinosaur or is he a resident? Oh, that's awesome. Rex.
So I'm older, and at Y2K, I was in this house in the backwoods in New Hampshire with a bunch of friends, and there was one of us there who had to be online at 11:59 p.m. at Y2K to make sure systems were going. And that is my go-to lesson thinking about dates. I never want to have to be that person on January 1st who has to update a dashboard or the first day of the new quarter or any of that. So the stuff you shared about using dates versus setting things in filters is huge. And to me, it also goes back to what David was talking about expecting usage to continue. Is having to come back and update things later is really hard, or just creates extra work that we don't need. And then my other point with it is I'll see a lot of people, because Tableau makes it so easy to write those date calculations, and then we do them, and then we have date calculations that depend on date calculations and so on inside of Tableau. And then ultimately our dashboard is slow. And there's often a point in making dashboards run fast that we need to move all of those calculations that are just there to get the numbers right. They don't depend on any user interaction. We need to move those upstream in Tableau, whether that's custom SQL, custom views, Tableau prep, whatever other tools we're using, DBT or whatever. And doing that kind of thing, like taking that fixed year of max order date, for example, and moving that out. I've had dashboards that double performance just by moving that one level of detail expression out. So little piece of advice there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I was thinking, so like in terms of maintenance too, also like adding comments to calculations. We've made good use of that feature. It's not a feature really, but like in terms of documenting when you have you know, people coming and going in terms of hiring and stuff, and people inherit dashboards. That's a really great way to be able to pop into a existing workbook and see like, oh, this is why this has been done, or the last time this calculation was updated was the last quarter or something. So it traces back to a Jira ticket that's tagged into that comment. It's really helpful to trace those things back. I was thinking too about like the naming conventions and saving yourself time with maintenance. I was just saying in class the other day, like being able to have a common what do you want to call it? Dichotomy. Taxonomy of your field names. So like if everything calculation wise is related to a certain, maybe it's all related to income stats, or it's all related to a particular flavor of things, you can start doing that stuff with your field names.
For sure. And using a common prefix on fields like, C dot or for calculation, or using folders to group, especially fields that need to be updated, really helps people pick up as well as those comments.
I actually have a question, Nick, for you. You mentioned that you guys are publishing data sets to your server environment and building on top of that. How do you organize what gets built in those data sets? Is that a singular team that owns what goes in there and like owns the enhancements that go into? Because we're, at WEX, we do a similar kind of approach, but with views and Snowflake. So same kind of idea, right? Just slightly closer to the platform versus in server. But we're at the point now where we have the team that I own is the centralized analytics team. And then we have all these federated teams who are looking for similar components. And what we would like to do is make those components available and document them in our data catalog tool, which is Elation. So I'm wondering what that like intake looks like to enhance those centralized data sets. And I guess I'll walk towards you so you can respond in the environment that you work in. I'm open to ideas, or if anybody else has done this successfully.
So I think we're a smaller organization. So
for example, my manager and I are the two who are most likely to make changes to like our sales pipeline data set, which is kind of the one that I'm referring to here. And we have each broken it for the other person multiple times. So we are our own business analysts in a way where we're really close to the business, our own distinct parts. We get a new requirement. We need to add a field. We need to update business logic. We're also going into the views and like changing the logic there, and then potentially, changing it downstream as well. But it's just really right now about communication and what we're doing. We're using Snowflake and Snowflake workbooks. I'd like to get us moved into something more like a GitHub where we can like take it out, make our changes, have it reviewed, and publish it. Right now, we're just using those workbooks to sort of keep everything going and then publishing. And then in the view, we have a change log up at the top of like the things that we've changed with an initial and then a date and what we changed. So we can always like go back and kind of see there. So yeah, it really is about documentation, communication right now. But yeah, if you have a larger group where you're
team size, just out of curiosity, like in terms of developers, not talking stakeholders.
I mean, 4 and 3 of them. There's 3 of us right here. So again, much smaller. Yeah.
1 team 2, no federation.
Oh yeah, sorry. Join a smaller organization.
So, and I have a question for you about something that was said earlier, as far as enhancements to a dashboard to make it a little more efficient. Do you have any tips and tricks that you kind of utilize, or when you start to develop something, you're like, okay, I know I have to.
Yeah, I think that, excuse me. Sorry. I think that's probably a full separate talk in and of itself. But yes, when you're looking at, those enhancements and improvements, a lot of it is about performance. And somebody was commenting earlier that pushing to a data source is always a great idea for that. And you have various ways that you can, improve that maintainability and the flow of your dashboard. On the developer side, strong documentation is actually almost more important than the build of the dashboard itself. On the user and performance side, things like switching up the user experience by how they interact with filters, how they interact with parameters, and improving speed and performance by reducing the weight of calculations is a great place to start. I think for more details, I probably need more time, more preparation than I have right now. But I don't think I answered your question at all there. I'm sorry.
No, it was a great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Shy, or anybody on the phone? I don't know if we have to chat up.
No chat question.
Chat question. All right, speak now. I knew it. I am thinking this other thing.
I would just say, riffing on that last comment, I mean, one thing that I came up when I was working on the project that I just talked about is basically the dry or don't repeat yourself principle. So the second you find yourself doing something more than once, maybe 3 times, that's when I find myself asking myself, can this be a parameter? Can be something, I'm writing 2024, 2025, 2025, and then I think, oh, I'm repeating myself. Stop. Can I figure something out? That's maybe a possible way a rule of thumb.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like documenting and putting it closer to the source is always when it's not always feasible, but when possible. All right, Anne, can we get a round of applause for Anne? Thank you so much for joining us from the second Portland. And then Patrick, do you want to share your screen?
I think our friends from England would say the third Portland.
Third Portland, yeah. All right. Thank you all for coming today. I really liked this space. I have to say, I'm curious on feedback from folks. I kind of I think it's a little bit easier to listen and interact in a smaller space like this. I know we got bumped out of the amphitheater, but we might actually ask for this space moving forward, unless anybody really loves the amphitheater and we can request it. But I thought there was good discussion and conversations, a little bit easier to do in a less echoey room. Okay, so we have some upcoming events that we just wanted to share about. So there's a panel session for Women's History Month coming up. It's a virtual event, bringing into analytics with Tableau. A couple of folks, that could be great. You're like, oh, Tableau can do all this stuff. That might be awesome. And then how to do cool stuff in Tableau. I'm not even going to try to say their last name. Agata, how do you say it? Yeah, I don't got that. I also believe that the Tableau conference is coming up in April 15th. So if you are going to the Tableau conference in San Diego, awesome. I'm sure that they'll put a lot of content online. I don't know if there's a virtual component as well. And then we have 2 awesome speakers already prepped for our June session. We haven't picked a date yet, but we will, everyone who is in this conversation is in our distribution list. So you will get that information in your inbox when we get that date. Big thank you to the RU for letting us use this space. We had some RU students in the room today and some RU instructors as we had in the room. So, round of applause for the RU. And I think a couple folks in the room are also job seekers. So this is a great opportunity to talk to people who are hiring in the industry in the greater Portland area. So please use this as an opportunity to introduce yourselves to folks, connect with folks. It's a really great way to find opportunities. And I think that's all. Oh, and there's also still a lot of food. So feel free to grab some on your way out. Thanks so much. Thanks everybody on the phone.